Uh, you have the image of a book with a small book we've written in French and which is in the process of being translated in English. So what I propose is to talk about political, practical, and scientific issues, emergence of the circular economy. Uh, so how it emerged, why it gained so much success in the recent years, and what are the current issues and avenues for research in the auto industry in particular. So what are we talking about? Circular economy, as you may know, there are two main issues which are quite specific to circular economy, which is the issue of resources and how to reduce the use and the consumption of renewable resources in the economy, which is the first issue. And the second one is waste, how to reduce the production of waste at the worldwide level. But what was intriguing for me when I started working on this issue is to understand why a kind of dominant storytelling narrative of the circular economy emerged and why it gained so much interest, enthusiasm among a wide range of audiences over the past 10 years. And people with a priori divergent interests, like companies, the state, NGOs, the social economy, and so on. So I will go back to this moment 10 years ago when the issue became very popular, and I will try to explain why it has gained this popularity. So the storytelling, I think you are all familiar with it. It says we should move from a traditional economic model called the linear economy, which can be summarized by the sequence take, which is extract resources, make, which means transforming these resources into products or technologies, use of products, and then disposal. At the end of life, products end up in landfill. This is the traditional model, which has become very important since the Second World War. And this model, of course, raises lots of problems. The first one, it's an extractivist model, which means that each time you produce new products, you extract new resources. In Europe, we consume 14 tons per inhabitant per year, which is quite a lot. Of course, in the US, it's much more. It is based on the acceleration of product renewal, what is also called intensive innovation, and the rise of consumerism, so the tendency to valorize new products instead of old ones, for example, second use, second-hand products, repaired products, and so on. This model has led also to a rapid growth of waste production. In Europe, it's 5 tons per inhabitant and per year. And another issue is, of course, there is a valorization of this waste. There is recycling, there is energy recovery, there is repair, and so on. But most of the economic value is lost. And there was this data from the European Commission dating back from 2012 saying that 95% of material and energy value is lost in Europe. This doesn't mean that only 5% is recycled. This means that, in fact, the dominant model is downcycling, which means that we recycle not in the same application, but in lower application with low value. And the idea of circular economy is to move from this old model to a new model. And here you have the classical butterfly diagram coming from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And the idea of this diagram is the principle of circular economy is closing the loops of energy, material, and product flows, which is also summarized by the 3 Rs. So reduce, meaning that the best solution is not to produce waste, for instance. Reuse in a large sense, which means repair, reuse, remanufacturing, and so on. And the last R, which is also the least interesting in terms of economic value and environmental impact, is recycle. And in the MacArthur Foundation diagram, if you go from the top to the bottom, you have the linear economy. So here you extract resources and then it ends up in landfill. And to avoid this linear economy, the idea is to close different loops, and you have very small loops and you have longer loops. When you have short loops, it means that you will try to extend the lifespan of products or infrastructures, for example, by maintenance, repair, reconditioning, and so on. And you have longer loops, and longer loops is, for instance, recycling. This is for technical products in blue, and in green, it's for biological cycles products. So you can, for example, develop biomethanization or different technologies to value agriculture waste, for instance. So there are lots of promises associated to the circular economy in this narrative. This is a very ecumenical narrative, meaning that in, for example, storytelling proposed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but also the European Commission, all circular strategies are considered valuable. So everybody can find an interest in developing one or another of these strategies. And what is put forward is economic creation. When we say circular economy, the key word is economy, meaning that you can create value, economic value, so you can attract the attention of policymakers, companies, and so on. So there are two key elements in this narrative I would like to insist on. The first one is the use of symbols, because when you talk about circularity, the symbol is a circle. And the circle, as you may know, is the symbol of eternity in ancient civilizations like Egyptian civilization, Greek, and so on. So this is not it's really purposeful. It's really intentional, sorry, to use a circle as a symbol, because in the ancient civilization, this idea of eternal return. So there is a life after death. So here you think the product is over, it's a waste, but in fact you can recycle and give a second life for the material. It's the same for repair. You think the product doesn't work, but you can repair it and give him a second life. So this idea of circularity is really um, really important and understandable in all civilization. It's a really generic approach. And the second issue is the promises of value creation. In the first report of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, they joined with McKinsey. They said that $1,000 billion could be produced on the long term with circular economy. Also, there are environmental gains like reduction of material footprint, of waste production, of CO2 emissions, impacts on biodiversity and water consumption. And lastly, there are social promises in terms of creating millions of local jobs through closed circular loops. And this is really important because for policymakers, it's a major concern. As you know, they are very worried about deindustrialization, delocalization, and so on. And here in the circular economy, the belief is when you repair, when you maintain, when you develop refurbishment, or even recycling, generally it's local. I mean, if you have to repair, you won't send a product to China because the delay is a key issue. You want the product repaired just right now, tomorrow, or the day after. So there is this belief that many local jobs can be created. And what is interesting is this approach that was promoted by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation was really reused by the European Union. So there is this visible end of Ellen MacArthur in this storytelling. So they formalized this approach at the beginning of 2010, 2012, 2013, so more or less 10 years ago. And it became rapidly very popular. And here you have a few indicators. New laws appeared all over the world, for example, in Asia, in China, Japan, Korea, in Europe, of course. Here you have in France a law called Aggeri, which means anti-waste for a circular economy with different ambitious measures. Lots of initiatives. Here it's an example of the social economy, which is very involved in the circular economy. Companies like Renault, there was this historical factory plant called Flins, and this factory is now dedicated to the circular economy, to retrofit, restart, recycle, re-energy. And they announced they will duplicate these kind of factories in different places and create billions of euros of revenues. And here you have the number of publications in Web of Science. I stopped in 2010 because it's an exponential growth, and so there were too many references. So there are thousands of articles on this issue at the moment from very different disciplines. So the question is, why did this concept attracted so much attention in the last 10 years? I mean, there are ecological concepts produced almost every year, and most of them don't get very popular. There are lots of fads about this issue, and for instance, there is lots of discussion at the moment in companies about regenerative economy. I didn't get what was meant by this concept. For me, it's very blurry. But the question is why this concept of circular economy worked. I can put forward two arguments. The first one is this concept was built as an attractive, rational utopia. The concept of rational utopia was proposed by a sociologist called Metzger, and he said there are three components in a rational utopia. So it's a kind of oxymoron, okay, because in principle, utopia is not the reality. It's an ideal city in the future. But here, the principle of rational utopia is to make this dream come true. So to make this ideal world realistic. And how do you make it? By using rational arguments. So this is why he uses this concept, and it's based on three elements. The first one is you need a mobilizing narrative as a guide to action. And this narrative combines a critique of an old model, so here the linear economy, and the presentation of an ideal model, here the circular economy. Second point, it is based on very striking images and diagrams, so you can visualize what is meant by the concept. And as I showed you, the circular loops are really easy to understand. The concept is easy to explain. And third point, you need rational development. So you need tools, indicators, models to guide collective action. And if you look at what happens in the world, there are lots of production of circular indicators. For example, there is a new regulation in Europe called CSRD. It's about extra financial directive. And there is a whole topic about circularity and circular indicators. There are also guidelines, norms, and so on. But it's not enough, because you can build a very beautiful story, but this is not the appropriate moment. And what is interesting, this storytelling was produced 10 years ago, and 10 years ago was a special moment. If I use a concept of crystallization by Hannah Arendt, it was a moment where a combination of economic and geopolitical events made a context favorable to the reception of this discourse. And what was this concept? First, during the years 2000, the price of raw materials was multiplied by 4. So economic actors were very concerned about the price, about the economy. So they said circular economy is interesting because if we can recover and reuse these materials and products, we won't need to buy very expensive raw materials. The second issue is the decision made by the Chinese government to impose quotas on the exportation of rare earths, and it was progressive, but it was a real panic. and the price of rare earths was multiplied by 100 during a short period of time, but it was a general panic all over the world because it's absolutely indispensable for all high-tech technologies. There was also the environmental crisis, which is still, of course, very, very important. And last, this idea of local job creation. So it's the combination of these different elements that made the discourse on circular economy, the people receptive to this discourse. So if we take, if we try to be reflexive, the question is the circular economy a new idea? In fact, not. It's not a new idea, nor on a theoretical level, neither on a practical level. So on the theoretical level, there are lots of historical works made by historians that show that this question of circulation, circularity was very active, for instance, since the 19th century. I gave you a few elements, and there were also authors in the UK and US and so on. But for instance, in France, an engineer, but he was also a politician called Leroux, developed a circulus doctrine, which was an answer to Malthus, because Malthus, the belief of Malthus was the growth of population was incompatible with limited resources. And Leroux said, we can increase productivity of resources of agriculture if we reuse, in fact, waste to fertilize the fields. The concept of urban mines, urban mining is also very old idea that appeared in the early 20th century, saying that in our waste there is gold, so there is a potential, economic potential. Kenneth Boulding wrote different thing about, he made a comparison with the spaceship where you have to be autonomous, and he made a comparison between what he called the cowboy economy, which is a linear economy, if you want, based on predation, and this autonomous spaceship where you try to recycle everything. Industrial ecology is based also on circularity, and there is this concept of cradle to cradle proposed by Brongart and McDonough. And here you have an image of Brongart and McDonough cradle to cradle, and you recognize green cycles and blue cycles, so technical cycles and biological cycles. So in fact, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, they were influenced and they imported the concept of cradle to cradle. But the question is why cradle to cradle didn't gain so much attention. And maybe an explanation, this is my proposal, is you can see here a little R, meaning it is a trademark. It is registered, so you need to pay if you want to use the cradle-to-cradle model. You have to pay. On the contrary, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it's open source. You can use it. It's free. It's a major difference. If you have questions, don't hesitate. And it's not new in terms of practices. And here I would give you a few elements. There is, of course, what is new is not the circular economy. What is new is a linear economy, because it developed during the 20th century. But Before the 20th century, the traditional economic model was a circular model. It wasn't called circular economy, but it was based on circularity. And here you have a drawing of chiffonnier. I don't remember. Yes, rag pickers, because we made papers during a long time out of rags, and there was a whole economy based on the recovery, the recycling, the repair of all objects and materials, because resources were very expensive to extract and to transport. So it was logic, and the cost of labor was low, so it was logical to try to make product last longer and to recycle everything. So circulation of materials and products between towns and country was the dominant model, and it was the dominant economic model until around 1870, according to the economists and historians. So this historical model was destabilized by three evolution, decline under the effect of three evolutions. The first one is, of course, industrial revolutions during the 19th century, which made the extraction and transport less costly. So it was a major change, but also with, for instance, chemistry, the invention of new synthetic materials with low cost and higher property than natural products. The second reason is hygienism. In here you have an image of Pasteur with the revolution of microbes and microbes, and these ideas that microbes are the reason of diseases, of epidemias. And so hygienism, the idea was to stop the circulation of material, especially of organic materials, to avoid cholera and so on. So the invention, for example, of dustbin, of landfill, and so on, it developed really with hygienism. And the idea was to stop the circulation. And the last point is, after the Second World War, the development of consumerism and incentive innovation. So the combination of these elements explain why circular economy declined, why the buying second-hand products or repair products was not fashionable, because in the consumer society, what is fashionable is to have brand new products. So this was the key reasons. So the challenges of the circular economy mode 2, what I propose to call mode 2, is not to go back to diseases, cholera, and so on. Is, of course, to change the referential. And it is about building a quality economy, an economy of quality, which means, traceability of substances and materials, which is really essential to avoid hygienic problem, quality criteria, which means qualification of resources and used products, product service innovation, and also inventing new business models. And here I would like to point out one interesting contribution on Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I think that's the major input of this approach. It was to, in a way, to consider each circular strategy, for instance, recycling, repair, reuse, and so on, was known for a very long time. But the people working in these different areas didn't see the links they had together. So the major input was to say all these circularity strategies are in fact complementary and can be put in a coherent scheme. And what is interesting is now companies are using the butterfly, the MacArthur schema, trying to identify what can be done in these different complementary circularity strategies. So that's the major input. So 10 years later, where are we? In fact, here it's a diagram produced by the circularity, it's called the Circularity Gap Report, and it's a kind of think tank which is called the Circle Economy. And here is the time, so 2000, and the total consumption of materials, of resources in gigatons, okay? So you can see an exponential growth. And since 2018, they evaluate a circularity rate at the worldwide level. So the quantity of materials that are reinjected in the economic process. And you can see that since 2018, this rate is going down, is declining. So it's a paradox because we've never spoken as much of circularity in the last 10 years, and the results seem to be very disappointing. So why? How can we explain these problems? So explain these gaps between promises and achievements. The main explanation, the assumption is there are lots of local experiments, but difficulties in scaling up. So in most sectors, there are lots of small experiments, but it represents a very small proportion of the activity. So the automotive sector is a very specific sector. It's very different from the others. But if you think of, for example, the fashion industry, the results are really terrific because there is circularity doesn't work anymore. Clothes are not repaired anymore. They are not recycled and so on because there is this tendency to low-cost product, to fast fashion with no residual value. And if you do not have residual value, you can't recycle, reuse, or repair. So this is another diagram from the European Environmental Agency to show that here in green, you have global GDP, in red, material footprint. They are totally correlated. So no decorrelation between consumption of non-renewable resources and economic growth, which is really a problem on the long term. Of course, it's known for a long time. It was the purpose of the Meadows report in 1972. And what is called green growth, which is very popular in the policy-making area and among economists, based on high-tech innovation like windmills, nuclear plants, and so on, are not an answer because they are very resource intensive. If you take the example of the electric vehicle, it uses much more materials than a traditional car. So it's a problem in terms of resource use. The production of waste is also climbing, especially in emerging countries with strong growth and growth of population. The question is how can we explain this gap at the micro level between promises and achievements? And I would like here to raise two issues. The first one is the myth of infinite circularity. And the second is a dominant model, which I propose to call low circularity, or weak circularity, if you want. It's better to speak about weak circularity, like weak sustainability. So the myth of infinite circularity, the term was used, for example, by the European Union in communication, in different documents. They said in an endless cycle of, and in fact, it's not possible. First, because there is the entropy law, an inevitable degradation of production and materials. Also, there are dispersive uses, which mean that there are some products that cannot be recovered. If you take the example, for example, of let's say a tire used that runs 50,000 kilometers, you don't have the same amount of materials because a large proportion is on the road. It cannot be recovered. Recycling is not a sufficient solution because there are these dispersive uses. There are also international traffics, illegal exports toward and also dispersion, geographic dispersion of deposits. So collection rates are quite low. If you look at, for example, electric and electronic products, waste, it's only 53% in France, and textiles is only 34%, so it's quite low. And down cycle remains the dominant model, meaning that recycle is developed in lower value applications. And most of all, the main issue is circularity is incompatible with economic growth. So it grows in volumes produced, especially. Not economic growth, but growth in volume. And I will give you just one example. It's aluminium, recycled aluminium. It's a metal which is perfectly recyclable, and it's very profitable to recycle. But the problem is recycled aluminium covers only 30% of the world's aluminium needs. Why? Because the aluminium waste has been put on the market 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago because it is mainly in cars, in buildings, and so on. And during this time lag, the demand of aluminium has strongly increased because it's a very good material, very light, and very important to, for example, to reduce the waste of the products. So it's inevitable. If you are in a growing economy, the volumes are going, recycling is not an appropriate solution. So what is the dominant model in company? I call it weak circularity. And weak circularity, what is it? It means pursuing the volume growth model by playing on material efficiency, optimization, and recycling. There is no reflection on sufficiency. So what are the needs of people? Is it really useful, for instance, to introduce SUV and bigger cars that consume lots of materials and renew all the time the products? And so in this logic, what are the limits of weak circularity? It's only an adaptation of the linear model at the margin. And there are also risk of rebound effects. For example, you design more fuel-efficient vehicles so you can drive more kilometers. Or you propose second-hand clothes like Vinted, so it's cheaper, and with the money you save, you buy more clothes. So in the end, you don't make any environmental gain. So what can be done? What is the alternative? Is what we call strong circularity. It's a joke, if you want, with strong sustainability. And the idea is decoupling resource consumption from wealth production. So it's trying to generate wealth differently. So I'm not very convenient with the idea of degrowth because people need to have jobs and decent revenues. But the idea is we need to a decrease of volumes of production, but we can try to generate value differently. So how? There are different avenues of research and experiments is to move away from a design to cost, because if you try to reduce at the costs, the value of the products, there is no residual value. It's impossible to develop circularity. And the race for growth in material production explores the path of sufficiency. So try to consume and produce better and less, but also change business design, uses, and business model. So, for example, an issue is try to extend lifespan, which can call planned durability, which is the contrary of planned obsolescence. Intensify uses. For example, develop as a service strategy where you keep the property of the product and you sign contracts with customers, or develop the sharing economy. Promote eco-design and also make a really clever use of high-tech. High-tech can be useful, but there is also a huge potential of low-tech, which is not fully explored. And lastly, there is a window of opportunity for the development of circular offers. There are new incentive-based regulations, like in France, Aggeri law, the CSRD directive, the European Green Pact, the Green Tax, and so on. And lots of new offers are due to these regulatory changes. And I give you just one example. A French company called Schneider Electric, which is a quite big company. They propose services, but also products, for example, in the construction sector. They provide electric devices. They develop a refurbished offer recently, and they sell it with a guarantee of 2 years. And they sell refurbished products at the same price as new products. And we said, how is it possible? How can you find customers who want to pay the same price? And they said, our customers are mostly big companies like Vinci, Bouygues Construction, and so on, lots of big companies. And these companies, they have to comply with the CSRD, they have to reduce their carbon footprint, resource footprint, and so on. And they are now they are incentivized to buy if you can prove that they make savings, that they reduce these footprints, that they have environmental gains, you can monetize these environmental gains. So that's really a new issue because 5 years ago it was absolutely impossible. But with these new laws, there are new business models that appear. So there are lots of critical factors and conditions. The degree of maturity is very different from sector to another. And there are different critical factors to develop circularity. The first one is securing limited deposits, because if you don't have the product, the waste, there is a competition to capture the waste, the product. So you have to secure your supply. This is a key issue. The second is to recognize in the interdependencies between players in circular loops, which mean cooperation and long-term contracts. Because if you kill your supplier because you want a cheaper supplier, the loop disappears. And it's not like in the linear economy where there is an infinity of suppliers. Here, you have a limited range of suppliers in a local context. There are lots of skills shortages in maintenance, repair, circular engineering, not in the auto industry because it's a very dynamic sector, but in other sectors, it's a real issue, like electronic products, clothes, and everything. There is a key issue also of financing circular projects and the insurability of circular offers. It's very, as it is new offers, for example, insurance companies say we are not confident in the quality of the products. How can you prove, for example, in the construction industry, that these products will last 10 years or more? So that's a big issue. You have to demonstrate the environmental value of circular offers. But above all, the key issue is to change the cognitive frameworks and cultural imaginaries of producers and consumers, meaning that you have to change, for example, the KPIs. Okay, in the company, if you are the performance is measured in terms of volumes, you will try to maximize the volumes. So you have to change the KPIs, and that's at all levels. And there are lots of impacts on organization, management control, skills, and so on. So you have to rethink value change KPIs, change probably accounting and financial instruments, and also develop training and competence, because you need new skills. And also, a key issue is about public actions to align public policies and education toward, for example, sufficiency. Maybe I will stop there because I have different slides in the automotive sector, but maybe we can discuss this point after the debate.
Okay, thank you very much, Franck. That's the second time I hear this presentation, but in English, not in French, and I always find it very stimulating and interesting. I don't think there is so many works around that brings this historical perspective and also highlights so well all the critical aspects and contradiction, both the potential of the circular economy. So thank you again very much. And so I would like to open the floor to the discussion, but also to stress that the idea is not only to discuss all these topics, but also to put in perspective in terms of what we can do together about that. I know that most of the people here have some interest and research going on circular economy, so do not hesitate when you ask questions. First, introduce yourself for Franck, who doesn't know you as well as I do know you, and perhaps mention the type of project that you would like to bring in this working group, and so we can then make a synthesis after that of how we can move forward for the working group. So the floor is open to any question, comments, or suggestions. Please do not hesitate to take the word. And can you perhaps stop sharing the screen, Franck, so we can all see the participants?
Yeah.
And perhaps if you need to share with us more slides, you can go to that later.
Yeah.
I see that Adriana is ready for the first question comment, so please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Frank, for your insightful presentation. I think it's very in line with the tradition of Gerpisa of being critical about the mainstream research. I agree totally with your presentation. It was really stimulating. And I'm here in Brazil. I work in the University of São Paulo here, and one of my main research topics is the transition to circular economy, especially with the Global South view, because I think one of very important topic when we talk about circular economy, the transition to circular economy, I think it's also the economical drive for people to adopt circular uh, solutions or to companies to adopt circular business models and circular strategies. And here in Brazil, and I believe in other global south countries, I think it's the same situation, we have a very strong necessity-driven circular economy going on. For example, when we talk about automotive sector itself here in Brazil, we have 6 times the market for used cars than for first-hand new cars, 0-kilometer cars. So it shows how important is this market and how important is the lifespan of the products here. It's much longer than in more developed economies. So I think it's the kind of, we have in Global South mainly, I think it's one of my main hypotheses that I'm working so far, that we already have some developed circular business models that are not usual for mainstream companies or for mainstream and developed economies. So I think it should be very interesting also to analyze this kind of necessity-driven, economical-driven solutions that sometimes we have to develop in order to have access to these products and these services, but within the budget of the majority of the population. And I'm available here to discuss and to make some projects together with other colleagues. And I think it's going to be very interesting to discuss further this issue of circular economy in the automotive industry. Thank you very much for the opportunity and for the presentation, Frank.
Thank you. That's a very important remark because we are very conscious of the fact that in the global south things are quite different because the labor cost, for instance, is much lower, so you can do much more things in terms of repair, maintenance, recycling, because the economic balance is, of course, different. Also, the level of poverty and make that you cannot, most people cannot afford to buy new products that are simply too expensive. So the circular economy has remained quite important, but I think one issue is these activities, and tell me if you agree or not, is informal economy, and it's not in the statistics. So, for instance, in the data produced by the circular economy, circularity gap, my assumption is they only rely on statistics or on the formal economy. But I think the informal economy is very strong in different countries or continents. For example, in Africa, it's mostly informal. So it's not in the data. But so the importance of circular economy is really, I think, much more important than what is usually said. If you take the example of the automotive sector, you're absolutely right, but I would like just to raise that the fact that in France the situation is very similar because the second-hand market is 4 times bigger than the markets for new car, and the reason is simply the price of new cars has become too expensive. I mean, I wrote recently a short paper chronicle for a magazine. The price of new cars has increased of 40% in the last 5 years in France, and so it's 2 times more than the level of prices. So what happened is the market is going down. Car manufacturers, their main sales are for rental companies and companies. But if you take citizens, if you take people, families, and so on, it's now 700,000 or 800,000 vehicles. So it's an historical low level. So it is very, very low. And on the contrary, the second-hand market is going very fast, and the vehicles are older and older each year. And that's a consequence that most people cannot afford to buy new cars. So we have, not to the same degree, but we have the same problem, I think, in Europe than in Brazil.
Yes, I think it's the same situation. Sorry, just to say.
I think please go ahead. And then I give the floor to Monica that asked you.
Okay, no, just to say I agree. We have a very high impact in formal economy, but also in formal as well. I think we don't have the actual figures on the impact of the GDP, of the how it impacts. But what I am noticing, that's a growth in the importance of these even informal activities in formal businesses. I think it's a very interesting way of thinking moving forward, how make a very interesting way of new research path, this formal impact, this to quantify this impact in the GDP. I think it's very interesting. Thank you, Frank.
Monica, please.
Yes, hello everyone. Just very briefly, I try to point out the main reason why we are here in a chat. But if there is a chance to meet you and see each other, I think it's good also to say it verbally. So in CELSI, in Central European Labor Studies Institute in Slovakia, we are right now running the project which tries to look at the impacts of different decarbonization scenarios on labor market, and one of them is circularity. And I have to say that in this respect, we are sort of hungry in the knowledge and concepts and understanding of how this can look like, especially in the automotive industry. So this is the main reason why we are here, and we are happy to join the forces on looking at this topic. Because as you know, Slovakia is a country where cars are mostly produced, not that much consumed in a sense of buying the new cars. So I think the topic of circularity mostly goes to this production side, yeah. So we are looking, and one important thing to mention is that we are looking at the impacts or which uses more circularity in production chains through input-output model. So we try to look to foresee the impacts for the future on the labor market, so on the demand on labor, basically. So this is what we do. We did similar study already for Czechia, which is a similar smaller country, and the impacts looked like decreasing the overall demand for labor. So I think this is like important topic also to raise. What is the impact of circularity or increasing circularity on the labor market or on workers or demand for workers? And maybe one side note to the debate you had already, thanks to Adriana's comment on second-hand cars. I think this is also interesting puzzle because the prolongation of the usage of cars, it's on the one hand prolonging the life of the product, on the other hand, because of the CO2 emissions are higher at all the cars, this is not that much in a way of decarbonization. So just a remark on the topic that this is also not that easy to combine and to see exactly what's the good or bad way, I would say. So that's on my side. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you're right. On the last point, I think it needs really studies because you're right. If there is a breakthrough in technology when, for instance, you will reduce drastically the CO2 emissions, you can wonder if it's really a nice strategy to make product last longer. For instance, it's a case for lamps. When you move from traditional lamps to LED, you have an interest to replace traditional lamps by LEDs because they consume less energy and they last longer, even if they are more expensive. In the car industry, in fact, the CO2 emissions of traditional engines have not decreased so much in recent years because of SUVization in a certain way. The fact that the gain in energy efficiency have been compensated by the fact that vehicles are heavier, and so the results, there is no real gain in terms of CO2 emissions, and that's why for example, the European Union is putting strong pressures on car manufacturers to electrify and develop electrification. So you're right. If we talk of very, very old vehicles, maybe it's not a good idea to make them last longer. If we talk about cars produced in the last 25 years, I'm not sure of that. But it depends on the sectors and it depends on the evolution of the products.
I had questions to the participants and perhaps to Franck as well, if he's aware of that. One of the reasons for this project that we have is that recent regulations have given to the OEMs, to the car makers, an extended responsibility on the vehicles. So they are responsible of the vehicle through all the life of the vehicle. They have to guarantee that it can be repaired, that it can be recycled to a very high level. And that leads the car makers to take circular economy more seriously and therefore to step into something that exists already. So there are products that do not have circular economy because they lose value very quickly. Now the cars maintain values through times, and that explains why we do have already circular economy for cars. The cars are repaired, the cars are maintained, the cars are put back in use across their lives, and then the cars are recycled already. And what is new is that the car makers now step into these and they consider these as a business for them, and they approach it with their different, they want to make it an industry of that. They pretend to be better at recycling cars or better at repairing cars than the actors that already take care of that. So my question is whether or not in your country you do have a similar issue. Now, I know that this is a European kind of driven policy, so I guess that in Czech Republic and Slovakia must be the same. But what about Brazil or United States, I see here, or Japan? I mean, do you have any idea of how car makers are supposed to take more responsibility for them and how they are stepping into this new field to take care of this responsibility, develop business models. So that it could be very interesting for us to compare with what's going on in other places. So that question for everybody. And for Franck as well, if you have any of these of other how these European regulation compare with other places in the world.
I can start, maybe.
Yes, sorry, I was mute. Yes, go ahead, Adriana. Then Joy also wants to take.
Yes. In Brazil, we have since 2011 what we call the solid waste national policy, but it's a kind of a umbrella regulation that says that the responsibility of the products, end-of-life products, is shared among producers, users, and sellers. So it's a kind of a very well-intentioned designed policy, but the actual results depends on the sector. What we have for circular for automotive industry that it's already on the run and it works kindly well is for batteries, for acid batteries, for tires, for lubricants. We have some specific regulations for this kind of product. But for autos, the complete auto, we don't have kind of a strong demand for the auto industry. So we do not see, what we see is a circularity when the market itself works well. In some, for example, for aluminum parts or for steel. For the steel, we have some kind of reuse or recycling of these materials and a lot of refurbishing. It's a kind of a fight from the auto sector, from the auto parts, and some repair shops and some independent companies that kinds of make the refurbishing of spare parts. So we have a lot to do, I think, in terms of regulation and public policies in this sector.
Maybe I can share a few slides because I didn't show the slides about the automotive sector. I can show you a few slides so you can you can react on these slides because I just shared a few elements about regulation and data. What do you think?
Okay, Franck, I just proposed just before to Joy ask his question so you can integrate eventually in the discussion of the slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Hi, thank
Joy,
you. Yes, can you guys hear me? Yeah, sorry, I did not have my video on because I don't have a good connection. Basically, thank you, Franck, for the discussion and everybody else. In terms of a circular economy, I just come back to the global South context. It seems that with these so-called SDG and circular economy, it is that the burden will remain to the global South context, which I'm going to explain to you a bit later. So when I look at the circular economy, as Franck mentioned briefly, it is connecting directly with the informal type of economy. Our colleague also in Brazil has mentioned as well. So the idea is that the informal economy in terms of manufacturing, refurbishing, and so forth, they exist. They're not, it's a part of a solution, but they're not very ideal. That's because lack of infrastructure and so forth. So I'll give you an example. For example, the waste of plastic war between UK, US, Canada, and the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. Just for the sake of argument, just the plastic, for example. This country, I mean, UK, Europe, and so forth, they just contaminated their own plastic that is already agreed on by this global South to recycle. So as a result, Duterte sent it back the garbage, the contaminated garbage, plastic, to these countries because they're no longer able to recycle. So in terms of automotive industry, like in Brazil, the tire, for example, in Indonesia, anything like that, they don't really recycle it, but this informal economy like make it a pattern to make it reuse again. And also there's a lot of after sales, and because of the buying powers, a lot of population, they maintain the car as long as they can work. And there's also a lot of sales also for used car. And lastly, about EV battery, it is my understanding that, in the US, they don't have a policy to recycle EV battery because it's dangerous. They claim that. And the UK is coming, they don't know yet. European Union as a whole, my understanding, they don't have that policy. However, China has a policy to recycle EV. Some of the Scandinavian country, they're still thinking about it, how they do it. So in other words, while the Western country and so forth can impose so-called SDG and circular economy, but I think the global South and also China still going to be burdened for this circular economy. So this all maybe just context and question. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. It's very good questions and comments. So I'd like to share again the screen so you can also answer.
Thank you very much, because I have a few elements that can feed the discussion, and especially the last question, which is really, really relevant. Sorry. So you can see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, that's perfect.
It was a few elements about the economic sector, which is, as it was said, it historically a whole economy has developed independently of car manufacturers. And because there is this high residual value that Tommaso mentioned. The considerable weight of used vehicle market, that's data in France, but it's higher in Brazil and probably still higher in other countries. And what is striking is the circular activities defined as according to the dominant model, it's 350,000 jobs in France, and it's increasing. It has increased by 15% in the last 10 years. Although the employees in the construction sector have decreased rapidly because plants have moved in other countries. So there is this sector in France. The situation, at least probably in Slovakia, the construction sector is developing. In Brazil, maybe it's also developing, but it's France, it's really decreasing. But at the same time, as the number of vehicles is still very high, as is increasing, it's the service sector which is increasing. It may change with the electric vehicle, but the number of electric vehicles in the park is still very low at the moment. And in Europe, the sales of electric vehicles have remained stable last year. The market didn't grow because they cut all the subsidies to new buyers. As I said, all this economy has developed independently. One of the reasons, if you take the recycling economy, there is a huge economic value of materials, scrap, aluminium, copper, platinum, and so on. And if the value of these metals increases, of course, the willingness to recycle increases as well. So these are data about what are the different the composition of a car. There are lots of different metals. I just would like to give you a few elements about the regulation, the auto sector in Europe, because it's very different in other countries. It's a very old issue, and I made my PhD on this issue 30 years ago. The end-of-life vehicle, there were, in fact, projects of regulation at the European level since 1990, so a very long time ago. And the idea was to act both on recycling and recyclability, so downstream and upstream on eco-design. And the idea was to better recover the shredder residue made of plastic, glass, tires, and heavy metals. And of course, it's a polluted residue. But the idea was if you depollute the vehicles at the start, at the dismantling stage, then you can valorize for instance, the plastics for energy recovery, and so on. So the issue was, if you want to treat, you need to depollute. And that's a general issue in recycling. The main efforts in Europe were made on depollution, because if you don't depollute properly, you cannot valorize the products. So this ended in the ELV directive from 2000 with targets for recycling, recovery, and recyclability, certification of treatment centers, obligation for car manufacturers to take back vehicles free of charge. And the impacts of the directive were first the reduction of the number of dismantlers, not necessarily of the people working, but it was a merging process, because there was a professionalization of the sector to get rid of all the small actors that did not comply with regulations. So it's more or less there are 1,700 dismantlers in France. Car manufacturers are more or less active on circularity. Some are for quite a long time, like Renault, and others are not active at all. So there are differences among car manufacturers. And during a long time, they refused to set up collective extended producer responsibility, because they believed that as there was value, it was useless to put in place this approach. But now it has changed because of two reasons. There is the issue of electric vehicles, and also the whole issue of the illegal sector and illegal export. And there are statistics saying that more or less 1/3 of the vehicles in Europe are escaping legal channels. So they're exported in Africa or elsewhere, or dismantled by illegal actors. So I think the main issue of the new extended producer responsibility is to reduce these illegal activities and to avoid the export of these products all over the world. There is also other regulation related to circularity, about spare parts, batteries, and so on, of course. So this, as I said, I gave you a few elements. There are concerns at the moment about the complexity of vehicle design, electronics, and their impact on repairability and recyclability. I don't know if the actors will adapt or not to these constraints, but this is a concern. There is also a concern about dismantleability and repairability of electric vehicle batteries. And also, there are concerns, but in terms of environmental impact, about electric vehicle design strategies. There were studies that show that very big electric vehicles, so SUVs and so on, they use on average 3 times more copper and aluminum, 5 times more lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, graphite than a small electric city car. So this is an issue about resources on the long term. And well, this is also a legal issue in a certain way to regulate the sector. And as I said, as prices are going up, there is a strong pressure on the second-hand market. Well, that's more or less the points I wanted to share with you. In France, in fact, the motivation behind the EPR scheme is reducing the legal sector, securing metal supplies, the issue of sovereignty, reducing environmental impacts. There are 2 options. You can have an individual responsibility. For example, Stellantis and Renault, they chose the individual responsibility. And you can have a collective scheme. And there is already one collective EPR called Recycler mon véhicule with different foreign car manufacturers and actors. It was created last year with different obligations in terms of collection rates, depollution, recycling, reuse, incorporation of materials, and so on. Well, that's more or less the main issue. It was only to share what is the state of the art at the moment in Europe and the debates, especially in France. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, just this one, maybe I forgot, because okay. I'm not sure you agree with it. I try to identify some kind of avenues of research for the future. In my view, I think the automaker strategy to make very expensive products, very heavy products, is a dead end in the long term. Because it's not compatible with reducing environmental impacts. There are limits because people cannot afford to pay these products. This is an issue. For instance, the average age of a buyer of a new car in France is 59 years old. So old people with money, young people cannot afford. So this is an issue. The question, I think, an open question is, what are the circular strategies for tomorrow? And well, I think that's a matter of research. There are different options. The challenge of service strategies. There are new business models to develop. For instance, about retrofit or reconditioning, refurbishing, and other question is what will be the impact of this new legislation on the sector, and what competencies also will be needed. Well, that was only a last slide to.
Thank you very much. That contributes to the debate. And by the way, we are recording this presentation in order to make it available to the network's members. So there will be a trace of all these suggestions and questions. And we will also make a sort of a summary for the working group. And we will officially create the working group on the Gerpisa side so you can join, and then we can spread the information and see if other people can join. One remark that was made by Joy before made me think that a very interesting case for us would be China. because of the amount of electric cars that are already in the market, and therefore that they might be more advanced in terms of considering the question of repairing these cars, make it available for the second-hand market. Also, is a place where the second-hand market is still small, so it's a different configuration, and that's typical of some emerging markets where the demand for new cars still outstrips the demand for second-hand cars, so the dynamic can be slightly different. But the amount of in terms of car fleet, clear that is the biggest electric car fleet in the world, and also because we know that the Chinese ecosystem for NEV, new energy vehicles, structured by public policies is very much comprehensive, so that the government takes care of the whole value chain from A to Z, but we know still a little bit, not so much. We know a lot about raw materials and refinery and battery production and the whole NEV value chain, but we know relatively little about all the recycling dimension and all the downstream part of the business. So I guess that there are not so many people in the room that can answer this question, but I believe that it would be interesting for us as a network to try to, since our next international colloquium in Shanghai, to try to find some other researcher also to help us to figure out if China can be an interesting matter of comparison on this. And anyway, I write down on my agenda. So if there are any other questions or comments,
yeah,
if you
just
want
a quick
to
question, quick one, because
Yes.
I'm doing research with JICA in Japan, with the EV in Indonesia, in Thailand, is actually the big automotive industry did not clearly state it, but the government of Japan has starting to have a policy similar to the Chinese policy. So I would agree with you, Tommaso, that in terms of EV vehicle, the Chinese, I went to Shenzhen and BYD, they are very cooperated and is backing up by the government, and is actually the government incentivized the BYD to be such a global manufacturing in EV. Thank you, Tommaso.
Thank you, Joy. So I was saying that we are running, close to the 2 hours maximum time that we have given ourselves for this start of meeting. So if any other wants to take the floor just to explain why you're here and perhaps what are you doing in the field of circular economy and what kind of topics you would like to put on the table for international comparison, for instance, please go ahead and take the floor. And perhaps, Frank, if you can stop again sharing the screen so
yes,
we can
I thought I did it. So, sorry.
No problem. I always do the same. I just forget sharing this. So, anybody else who wants to take the floor? Mark, please go ahead. I didn't see your end.
Just a short comment about what you said about China. At the time being, China is lagging clearly behind Europe in terms of waste, in terms of recycling and so on, but they are moving very fast. And they have new regulation project to deal with that. And we can expect that in 2-3 years, they will have a strong regulatory framework to deal with, I wouldn't say circular economy, but at least in terms of recycling and expanded producer responsibility.
Okay, thank you for this remark. I don't know if Kara is with us. I know that you with Bruce you have some work going on circular economy in the United States. I don't know if you want to share any comments with us, and other colleagues here are still there. See that Carolina put some comments in the chat about their. Hello, Kara.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Great. Yes, we have looked at this in the United States and North America as well, and I presented on this the last 2 years at our symposiums. And we just continue to follow because, as you know, there's a lot going on in our industry. Things are changing, and we continue to follow the developments as far as particularly the EV value chain and the battery supply chain in North America. So there's a lot of development. We've also looked more lately at the electric powertrain and components and systems, again, in North America, and just trying to follow the supply chain there. So that's a separate project. But what we were finding with the battery supply chain, the recycling going on there, for the most part, seems to be economically driven, looking for materials to put back into the supply chain. So that's what we're seeing. And it is happening, but from what we can tell, the percentages are very low. So it's just contributing to the overall supply chain, and that's what we're seeing.
Okay, thank you very much. I remember also the presentation of Christine on the Tesla model, highlighting how much Tesla is doing a lot to make the cars cheaper, but that has an impact on the repairability of car, or the durability of battery. And I understand that since there are a lot of Tesla sold in the United States, that these start to be an issue. The fact that the car is less durable than an ICE car, also precisely because Tesla has a specific kind of engineering approach to the car, like gluing the batteries now that was doing, or using this giga casting that makes it harder to repair the cars. So I think that also is quite interesting in terms of what Tesla, but apparently also Chinese NEV makers are doing to optimize new vehicles, but to the detriment of the circularity of these vehicles, because it became harder and more expensive to repair them and so on. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, but I think that's also interesting topics for us.
It's very interesting. From what I understood, that many of the automakers are following that and learning from that model. Again, they're in the forefront.
Okay, thank you very much. So I give a last opportunity to the floor to add some elements or question to our discussion, which was already very rich and interesting. And otherwise, I just tell you that, so we will make a summary of what we've been talking about. And we're definitely going to make a second meeting that will be more about bringing proposals to the working group, see what we can do together. This was about introducing the topic, see how many of you are interested, and give you an idea of what we are doing with the ANACECA project in France. And then we will follow up. So we got some feedback from you, and then we will follow up with another meeting where we start to look at proposals to, if there are opportunities to start international comparison, and see what we can do together also before the next international colloquium. So I'll stop, I guess. Let's stop here. I would like to propose to thank Franck Aggeri for the excellent presentation and all these insights. We are very lucky to have somebody who is working for so long on this sector and has such insights to help us figuring out this. Because in the automotive sector, even if circular economy has been existing de facto for so many times, I cannot say that there are many researchers, with few exceptions represented here, that have taken really interest and have really got into this topic as deep as Franck has done in the past. So this is a great opportunity for us as the French team of Gerpisa to build on this. And so I just say to you that we will have another meeting. I will let you know when. We will feedback to you. We will create the group online, so you will be able to join officially, and we can have sharing mailing list. And for now, I think that's all. Very good. Thank you again, Franck. Thank you, everybody. And so see you soon.
Thank you, Tommaso.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.